Can anyone not hear me? Shout if you can't hear me. Okay, good. I've got a lot to go through, so I'll be talking very quickly. If at any stage you don't understand, simply listen faster. I'm Joe Twyman. I'm Head of Political and Social Research at YouGov and a founding member of the company. I'm here today to talk about what I've called methods madness. Essentially, it's about the importance of methods, the importance of research methods to all of us. I'm going to talk about why they're important to you and why they're important to humanity. As we go along, I might ask some questions of the audience, but at the end, there'll be plenty of time, hopefully, for some more questions. In exchange for good questions, I brought along some gifts. YouGov playing cards. Now, as if a pack of YouGov playing cards in itself was not exciting enough, each of these cards has individual statistics about politicians, British politicians, on each one. So these really are the hottest thing in town at the moment and a great Christmas gift. I should point out that if you choose to play top trumps with these cards, that is your individual legal responsibility. And for £15,000, not our deal. And for the best questions, YouGov memory sticks. So, on we go. A couple of moments of housekeeping first. Firstly, please follow me on Twitter. As I'm sure you can appreciate, I'm hilarious. But also, I'm having a competition with the person who sits next to me at work to see who can get the most followers. I only need 3 more for the all-important psychological 7. Since we're all digital natives, I thought we'd have a hashtag for this particular talk, so I've chosen the most fun ever. If you could use that, that would be good. I'd like to start then with some thoughts about research, some thoughts about this methods madness that we hear about. My favourite quote about research, and I say my favourite because it's sent to me probably about 3 or 4 times a day. Some thoughts on research: lies, damned lies, and statistics, from Benjamin Disraeli. We hear that an awful lot in the research industry. Anyone who works with any kinds of research methods will hear that. It's all to do with methods madness. But my favourite quote about such things is this: people can come up with statistics to prove anything, Kent. 40% of people know that. And that's from Homer Simpson. So those are the 2 really important quotes that I think define this sense of methods madness that we have in this country at the moment. But as I say, I'm going to talk about why a good working knowledge of methods, an ability to cut through this methods madness, is important for 2 things. Firstly, it can be good for you. I'm going to talk about why. And secondly, it can be good for humanity. Okay, so I'm going to take each one of those in turn. Why is it good for you? It's good for you if you want to get a job. Now, I know that some of you are thinking of doing a PhD and a master's, so you may not want a job, and that's fine. You may, it's a joke, Jackie, it's fine, it's fine. So you may want to work in academia, and you may think, oh, well, I'm just going to sit in my ivory tower and think. You may think, I'm not going to do anything associated with methods at all, and so I don't need to think about that. I'm going to get a job that involves no degree of maths or thinking at all, in which case you're wrong about that as well. It doesn't matter if you're on an ivory tower, if you're working in a bookstore, if you're sat in a library. Having an understanding of quantitative methods, having an understanding of qualitative methods, having an understanding of survey research, having an understanding of research methods generally, it's hugely important because it's a massive differentiator between you and any other people going for jobs, going for positions, going for anything. Let me explain why. I want to explain why using 3 people. The example comes from 3 people. The first of these is the Regius Professor of Political Science for Great Britain, Professor David Sanders from the University of Essex. The second one is me. And the third one is you. So let me start at the beginning then. Why is it good for you? Well, 3 differentiators. This is Professor David Sanders, or as I prefer to call him, Dad. And that's a characteristic pose for our family. It's sort of, why are you so short? Why am I so tall? It's a good question, but we never mention it at Christmas. When my dad was applying for jobs, applying for positions, and starting his professional career, the major differentiator then was using computers. If you could use a computer back in 1860 or whenever it was he was going for a job, it was a massive differentiator. It set you apart from so many other people who were applying. And so immediately you had an edge over them. By the time I came to apply for a job, back in the early 1940s, the differentiator then was the internet. If you knew how the internet worked, and this will sound ridiculous to you, but back when I was applying for a job, if you knew how the internet, down with the kids. If you knew how the internet worked, that set you apart from everyone else. It was a major thing because it was the big thing. It was the next big thing in the way that computers had been the next big thing. People were excited about it, but they didn't quite know why. They knew that it had power, but they weren't quite sure how it had power. They knew it had the potential to change the world, but they couldn't do it. The internet provided that differentiator for me. But we're not talking about my dad, we're not talking about me, we're talking about you guys. I understand it's a documentary. We're talking about you guys. And what's the big differentiator now? What's today's big difference? Today's big difference is big data. Some of you will be wondering, what's with the picture of Shovelface? The answer is very simple. Big data is the next big thing. Big data has the power and the potential to change the world in innumerable ways and for so much more for the better. But here's the problem. This is my favorite quote about big data. Big data is like teenage sex. Everyone talks about it, nobody really knows how to do it, everyone thinks everyone else is doing it, so everyone claims they're doing it. Teenage sex. Except he's 103. And apparently that's okay. So, big data has the potential to change the world. If you have an understanding of research methods, if you have an understanding of data analysis, this can differentiate you. You can have the power to change the world for the better. Methods, research methods, quant methods, qual methods, survey methods will give you that power. And you can be good. Oh, sorry. Oh, yes. Sorry, I forgot to attribute that. Sorry, Dan. Some guy from Duke. You have the power to make things good for humanity. Now, why can you make things good for humanity with research methods? The answer to that is very simple. The answer to that is very simple because if you understand how research works, you can ask the kind of questions that need to be asked to determine whether this massive amount of data that we now have access to, and not just through surveys, not just through qual interviews, not just through quant methods, but through social media analysis, through buying habits, all these sorts of things that feed into big data. If you have the ability to critically interrogate that, then you can really deliver on the potential that big data provides. So I'm going to go through some of the things that show why it's important to get these things right, if the methods madness is going to be cut through and it's going to be good for humanity. Firstly, I want to start at the beginning. What is good research? Good research is data that accurately represents and reports the opinions of the population it is trying to research. Does anyone know who said that? The answer is it was me, because I couldn't find a better quote, so I thought that was probably good. That's a picture of me when I'm annoyed. Become familiar with it. So that's good research, but good research is massively important for the following reason. Well, I guess the best explanation comes a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. You're going to have to stay with me on this. Okay, so let's think about Star Wars. Let's think about Star Wars. Most of us are familiar with the first film of the series, A New Hope, released in 1977. Many people are less familiar with the Star Wars Holiday Special of 1978. And the Star Wars Holiday Special of 1978, as some of you may know, featured Chewbacca, the Wookiee, visiting his home planet of Kashyyyk, where he visited his family. No one's left yet. This is probably a good sign. Now, why is this important? This is important because when he was on his home planet, Chewbacca visited his child here, whose name is Lumpel. Anyway, this is Chewbacca's child. Chewbacca's child is a Wookiee kid. And that's important because of the Wukid hierarchy of outcomes. Wukid hierarchy of outcomes states that you start with data. From data, you derive information. From information, you gain knowledge. From knowledge, you get understanding, and understanding leads to wisdom. If your information and your data are not correct, if there are problems with your information and your data, it doesn't matter how good the latter stages of that process are. Your information, your knowledge, your understanding, and your wisdom will be incorrect. You will not be able to cut through the method's madness. You will not be able to deliver on the potential of big data and make things better for humanity. Instead, you will get things wrong. So this is the Wukid hierarchy of outcomes. It's expressed in various different ways. In the research industry, we often use the term BIBO. BIBO is short for bollocks in, bollocks out. In other words, if you put in rubbish, you get rubbish coming out the other end. Also known as lipstick on a pig. There's only so much lipstick you can put on a pig, it's still a pig. And polishing a turd. You can polish a turd. I'm losing that research fellow status, aren't I? So there we go. How does that work in practice? Well, things can go wrong. Methods madness can intervene if you don't understand how things work. This is a research scientist from the University of Sheffield called Brooke Magnati. She's better known as the sex blogger Belle de Jour. And she wrote a book looking at attitudes to the sex industry in Britain, but also the behaviour of sex workers in Britain. What did she find? She found two findings from two different peer-reviewed articles. The first was Prostitution and Trafficking in 9 Countries, an update on violence and post-traumatic stress by Farley et al. And the other was Beyond Gender, an examination of exploitation of sex work by Jenkins. Both of these studies asked sex workers if they wished to stop working in the industry within the next 3 years. So they were investigating attitudes to sex workers, to British sex workers on keeping working in the industry. It found two things. Farley et al. Found that 89% of sex workers in Britain wished to stop working in the industry within 3 years. Jenkins found that figure was 3%. Two peer-reviewed articles, two findings, two changes potentially to humanity, and both in completely opposite directions. Why? Because in this instance, both people did not critically evaluate the data. They did not ask the kind of questions that people who are familiar with methods need to ask. And so what if you're basing a policy on sex work on one of these? Which one do you choose? I'll tell you which one you choose. You don't choose either of them because they're both wrong. You need to know that they're wrong. And this is just one example of which there are many. And so ultimately we're looking at two key questions. Is it significant and is it meaningful? And it's only through quant methods that you're able to arrive at answers to these questions. In order to work out these answers, it's good, for instance, to ask, well, who's answering the questions? Who's answering the questions to these surveys or to these qual interviews? Sampling is important. Why is sampling important? Because you need an effective method to select respondents. Regardless of whether you're looking at a group of people who I stole off the internet who decide that posing in fleeces with no shoes on is a sensible way, or in any particular group, you need, this is the first of 2 Village People references today, you need to select key people to represent that group. And of course, the size can sometimes matter. Size can particularly matter in quantitative research. Here's a graph. Shows the margin of error. The margin of error and how it decreases as sample size increases. It's not linear, but it does decrease. And people say, oh, right, well, that's very exciting. But it's also only relevant for simple random probability samples. And if you do quant methods, if you understand the method's madness, you know that different companies and different organizations will try and present that data in different ways when they don't have simple random probability samples. Some will ignore it. They'll say the sample size for this survey is 2,000. The margin of error is plus or minus 2%. Others will use comparison and distraction. The sample size for this survey is 2,000. The margin of error for a simple random probability sample is plus or minus 2%. Others will refer to their track record. The sample size is 2,000. Our previous records have shown our margin of error is plus or minus 2%. Others will make their own. The sample size for this survey is 2,000. The notional margin of error is plus or minus 2%. If you understand your quant methods, if you understand research methods, if you can look through the method's madness, then you'll be able to see what the true margin of error is. But of course, size isn't everything. Who remembers the Downing Street e-petitions website? This was going to change the country for the better because people would have the opportunity to submit what were called surveys to the government. This is what it looked like first time around. It was described by an anonymous government minister as an own goal thought up by a prat. Why? Because these so-called surveys, with so-called respondents taking place, had millions of people agreeing with them. We, the undersigned, petitioned the Prime Minister to scrap the planned vehicle tracking and road pricing policy. 1.8 million respondents agreeing with that. And so I got phone calls at work from journalists saying, hang on, your surveys get 2,000 responses, this gets 1.8, so that must mean that theirs is a lot better than yours. And I'd explain the distinctions of sampling and passive sampling and active sampling and how size doesn't always matter. And they wouldn't get it because they were confused by method's madness. But fortunately, I could point to some of the other petitions on the website that had over 1 million people agreeing with them. For instance, we, the undersigned, petitioned the Prime Minister to replace the national anthem with Gold by Spandau Ballet. It is a great song, admittedly, but I'm not sure I'd want it played at the Olympics. And we, the undersigned, petitioned the Prime Minister to make Jeremy Clarkson Prime Minister. Wonderful. And size is not just a problem when it comes to government websites. If you're looking at who's the most influential person in the world, you might turn to Time magazine. They ran a survey on this back in 2007, I think. They ran the 3rd annual Time 100 poll to find the world's most influential person. And they said, we invite the internet community to try and fix this poll because we're certain that we have systems in place to prevent that happening. And so we will find out once and for all who the most influential person is. And here he is. His name's Moot. Anyone know who Moot is? Anyone heard of 4chan? No one's admitting to have heard of 4chan. Very sensible. 4chan, most recently famous for leaking the naked pictures of various celebrities. Previously famous for attacking opponents of WikiLeaks. And before that, they did this. They programmed from scratch their own auto-voting software, which they used to get Moot to the top. This was then adapted to launch denial of service attacks against WikiLeaks and subsequently used to distribute pictures of naked celebrities. They got Moot to the top, but not just that, they managed to get so sophisticated with their voting that they were able to spell out marble cake, also the game. Which, if you're on 4chan, is hilarious. But it's not just about size, it's about hard-to-reach samples. It's not just about quantitative research, it's about qualitative research. We were approached in 2005 by a company saying, we understand you can reach hard-to-reach groups. And we said, yes, that's right. They said, excellent, we'd like to know who's going to be the new Pope. At the time, the Vatican had locked in its rooms a load of Roman Catholic cardinals to do the whole white smoke, black smoke thing. This company that contacted us wanted us to interview Roman Catholic cardinals. We explained that this was rather difficult. They said, fine, we'll go somewhere else. The point is that if we had been able to speak to any Roman Catholic cardinals, it would have been pretty good. And the power of 1 or 2 qualitative interviews with such a small group would have been massively, massively helpful. But in that instance, we couldn't do it. In many other instances, you can do it. And just because the sample size is low does not mean necessarily that it's any less meaningful. So we need to know about that. We also need to be able to ask, well, who commissioned the polling and understand the answers there. For instance, companies approach us with headlines. They say, we don't care what research you do. All we're interested in is getting this headline. Anyone like to guess what this headline was? Lancashire hot pot causes constipation hotspot. It's a genuine example. We were approached by a commercial company to do that. And then, of course, there's women in bikinis. Women in bikinis feature a lot in research findings, it turns out. This picture is taken from a research report. Anyone notice the similarities to another picture of a woman in a bikini? How about this? Ursula Andress from Dr. No. The previous person was Katie Hill, who used to present Blue Peter. Now, you might be wondering, why am I showing 2 different pictures of women in bikinis? Apart from the fact that women in bikinis feature in research findings. But here's the thing. If you don't know your quant methods, if you don't understand survey research, you may not realize that just because a research article has lots of pictures of women in bikinis, it does not necessarily make that data valid. Let me give you an example from this. The iconic scene in 1962 Bond movie in which a stunning honey rider emerges from the surf singing to herself has been voted the most inspiring bikini moment in history. A survey by Diet Supplement LipoBind found most slimmers used Andress's curves as inspiration for their Beachbody diets. It was only after a combination of going to the gym on a daily basis and taking LipoBind, Katie went down from a size 16 to a size 10 over a 5-month period. Thanks, Daily Mail. And as we all know, it's very easy to laugh at the Daily Mail, but it's also easy to laugh at, for instance, the Daily Mirror, and its 25% of brides would have cosmetic surgery. Or the Daily Telegraph, and truckers and lawyers being Britain's fattest professions. The Daily Telegraph again, British women wanting a figure like Kelly Brook. Half of women have developed muffin tops. That's from the Daily Telegraph as well. And in all cases, these are backed up by surveys and research reports. And in all cases, for more information, visit lipobind.com. This is methods madness, absolute madness. Who's running the poll is important. At the last who is asking the questions is also important. At the last general election, there were 12 different companies conducting surveys on the election and its outcome, including one poll, who I haven't put down here because they were so bad they didn't warrant a response, but they were the people that that ran the work for LipoBind. So you have to understand that transparency is key to this. You have to think, well, do they have a postal address? Can you access full data tables? Do the companies fully disclose their methodology? Do they have a track record? Are they cited in academic literature? Are they members of the British Polling Council or Market Research Society? Do they outsource elements of their operation? If you don't know to ask these questions, you can't know whether the companies running those surveys are running them on behalf of LipoBind as an advert or running them because they actually want to know the answer. But speaking of questions, of course, a really important question: what questions are being asked? You need to understand that phrasing can make a massive difference to surveys, and it can make a massive difference to the data that comes out of it. And the decisions based on that data can have huge implications. Let me give you an example of how it's all about the phrasing. You could say, do you happen to have killed your dog? You could say, as you know, many people have been killing their dogs these days. Do you happen to have killed yours? Could say, do you know any people who've killed their dogs? Or, which of the following corresponds most closely to the current state of your dog? All different, valid questions to ask if you're investigating dog death. But that's obviously, oh, I say obviously, that is a joke example. That's a joke example, and no policy decisions will be based on that. No announcements in Parliament will be based on that. How about this? Currently, abortions are only legal up until the 24th week of pregnancy, except for cases of severe disability. Do you personally believe the period during which a legal abortion can be performed should remain at 24 weeks, or should it be changed? That's the question we ask when we want to see attitudes to changing the law on abortion. And we find that 46% of people favour a decrease. It's not a perfect question, nothing is, and you can always pick holes in it. It's a hell of a lot better than this one. In the last year for which figures are available, government statistics have shown that 52 babies survived having been born earlier than 24 weeks. At one specialist neonatal unit in Britain, 5 out of 7 babies at 22 weeks gestation survived. In light of this, do you think the upper limit for abortions should be kept to 24 weeks, increased or decreased? 72% of people said they favoured a decrease. And then what happens when Nadine Dorries stands up in Parliament wanting to support her position for decreasing the time limit of abortion? Which one do you think she uses? Which quote do you think she uses? Correct. This one. And she doesn't put the preamble in. She doesn't include the full question wording. All she says is that 72% of people in Britain favour a decrease. Methods madness with real-world implications. And agree-disagree statements can be just as misleading. We ran a survey that, I should say, agree-disagree statements are used quite a lot because they're cheap and effective, and if you're doing a telephone survey, you can get in a lot in a short space of time. So certain agencies enjoy using them. And we ran a survey where we tested 2 different things to see people's attitudes to things. The European Union, in fact. Britain should leave the European Union but maintain close trading links. We found that 55% of people agreed with that. So you might conclude a majority of people wish to leave the European Union but maintain close trading links. We also asked, Britain should remain a full member of the European Union. We asked that at a different part in the survey, and we found that 55% of people agreed with that. So, what do? What's your major policy implication here? How do you change humanity? Do you stay part of the European Union or not? Very, very difficult. And it's not, of course, just the question options and question wording that's important, but also the answer options. This is an example of a survey we were sent by a client. They wanted to run the following question. In your opinion, what's the best thing that's become free? Interest-free credits or loans, CFC-free deodorant cans, pensioners' bus passes, entry to museums, Willie the Whale, Nelson Mandela, other, please specify below. People genuinely ask that. The answer options are always important. Second Village People reference. And of course, how the questions are being asked is important. If you have an understanding of how qual research works, if you have an understanding of how quant research works, you can then understand when it's appropriate to conduct a qual survey, a qual interview, a qual focus group, a quant survey, and how best to do that. For instance, there are different implications for doing something face-to-face or doing something as a telephone survey. I should point out, actually, at this point, this is what we call a stock photo. And stock photos you buy off the internet and you buy the copyright and you can use it in its advertising. And all telephone interviewers, all the companies that run telephone interviews always have pictures like this. Someone of indeterminate ethnicity, smiling, very pretty, with relatively high-tech equipment. Well, I tell you, I've worked in telephone research, and often the people that work there are variations on that theme. So it's definitely worth thinking about that. So, but obviously, telephone research, whether it's qual or quant research, has its own implications. As does online research, the area in which I work. Self-completion. We'll be doing some of that later, I believe, on the feedback boards. Has advantages and it has disadvantages. I don't think Arnie was actually doing a self-completion survey then, but it's not the point. And then mixed mode research. It can all look good, but you need to understand how things work. Then there's the methods madness to do with when they are asking the questions. When they're asking the questions. The timing of questions can be hugely important. It can have major implications. It can change humanity. My favorite example of this, questions on capital punishment, questions on bringing back hanging, questions on the death penalty. For years and years and years, people would say a majority of people supported the return of the death penalty, and they would point to specific surveys that were conducted. But the thing is, in normal times, we don't happen to run questions about whether the death penalty should be returned. When do we run questions about the death penalty? We run questions about the death penalty generally when newspapers ask us to do it. When do newspapers ask us to run questions on the death penalty? It's always in the aftermath of an atrocity. So it's always the days and weeks after Soham. It's the days and weeks after the beheading of drummer Rigby. It's the days and weeks after 7/7. It's not at normal times. And yet, this data is consigned to the data banks, goes into the data files, and we never see the timing associated with it. We just see the date. And then, of course, how is the data being analysed? There's loads of stuff on statistical weighting that you need to know about if you're to understand the method's madness. Loads of stuff about target percentages, about how large independent surveys are best to weight things, about how sample sizes have to be sufficiently large, about how you need large independent surveys, etc., etc. This is all important. As is how the results are being reported. How are the results being reported? There's a famous example of this from cat food. 8 out of 10 cats would buy Whiskers. That was a slogan for some time until someone complained to the Advertising Standards Authority and said, hang on, have they done a survey of cats? And they said, well, no, it's a survey of cat owners. So they had to change the slogan to 8 out of 10 owners said their cats preferred Whiskers. And then the ASA said, right, so 80% of the owners said that Whiskers was their preferred thing. And they said, well, no, actually, most people said the cats didn't mind because they're cats. And so they, in the end, had to change it to 8 out of 10 owners who expressed a preference said their cats preferred Whiskers. At which point, I think they just thought, fuck it, and went with cats would buy Whiskers or something like that. So we've seen all the common mistakes: insufficient sample sizes, rebase percentages, percentage increase versus increased percentages, stargazing, false inferences and apophenia, and our old favourite, correlation versus causation. If you don't understand your quant methods, then this creates methods madness, and it's not good for humanity. So, Key questions. Who commissioned the polling? Who's asking the questions? What questions are they asking? How are they asking the questions? When are they asking the questions? Who is answering the questions? How is the data being analysed? How are the results being reported? Oh, these are all key questions. Key questions that you need to be able to answer, and that you can only answer if you have an understanding of quant methods, of qual methods, of survey research, of methods generally. These questions will allow you to cut through the methods madness and deliver on the massive potential that big data provides. You guys can change humanity for the better and get a pretty good job out of it as well. Just a couple of things. Firstly, remember Twyman's law. Now, I confess I didn't come up with Twyman's law. It was created by a guy called Tony Twyman, who's a media researcher, now long retired, who's no relation of mine. But increasingly, I think I could have come up with it. So I'm sort of passing it off as my own. And Twyman's law states that anything that looks interesting or unusual is usually wrong. If you remember this, you should be able to cut through most of the methods madness. Just quickly then, before we go on to questions, if you happen to be interested in the 2.5 years that I spent doing research in Iraq, you can look it up on the BBC website. Alternatively, if you thought, you know what I'd like a further 34 hours of this guy talking, then I can recommend the got it in order. Got it in the wrong order. If you thought I want to work with this guy for 12 months, then why not go for the 12-month paid student placement in the YouGov Political and Social Research team. It starts in August 2015, and the deadline for applications is the end of this year. Don't send it at 5 to midnight on New Year's Eve. Full details of that are on our website. But yes, as I said, if you're thinking what I really want is 34 more hours of this guy, then I can very much recommend Making Numbers Count, my course at the Essex Summer School in Social Science Data Analysis. If you happen to be an undergraduate, it's well worth a look. And lastly, a shameless plug. Sex, Lies and the Ballot Box, 50 Things You Need to Know About British Elections. If you're looking for a book for Christmas for a social scientist or someone interested in politics, this is the shit, I'm telling you. It's really, really great. And I would say that even if I hadn't written 2 chapters. It's well worth it. The chapter about sexual behaviour and politics is definitely the best thing. So that's that. As I say, I'm going to open it up. We've got about 5 minutes for questions. I'm going to open it up to the floor. But if for whatever reason you perhaps have questions that you don't want to raise here, sounds a bit weird, here are my contact details. I'm obviously on Twitter, but also Facebook, LinkedIn, MySpace, Tinder. I'm joking, obviously I'm not on MySpace. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions? And remember, there are cards to be won. Thank you very much.